Well, it's that time of year again, guys. It's time for a new chapter, and we're starting a new chapter on the Renaissance and Reformation, and it is a very exciting one, both halves of it. I think it's going to be really fun, so let's jump right into it. First of all, what a century to be alive. There was so much change going on during the Renaissance and Reformation in every aspect of your life. After hundreds of years of very little change, now the entire world is changing and changing very, very quickly. And it was very exciting. The period that we're talking about, called the Renaissance, means rebirth because it seemed like civilization had been reborn. After the Roman Empire died, it seemed like a lot of the goodness of it died as well. A lot of the art and architecture and music and love of knowledge and mathematics and all that good stuff all died with it and did not come back very much in any way, shape, or form until the Renaissance. It is the rebirth of ancient Greece and Rome. In contrast with the Middle Ages, where people are living through superstition and ignorance. They don't know and they don't care to know. During the Renaissance, people want to know. Will you show me? They want to know everything. They want to know how the world works. They want to know about plants and flowers, about music, about mathematics, about science, about history, about uh, rhetoric and speech and drama and acting, and they want to know everything. They want to have scientific fact rather than superstition. They want everyone to be able to learn, not just rich kids. There's a lot of different attitudes during the Renaissance than during the Middle Ages that are going to show very sharply a sharp contrast that we're going to look at. Your book uses the phrase a hearty zest for living, living life to the full. In the Middle Ages, life for most people was kind of awful, and they just learned to live with it and to focus on the afterlife, how heaven will be better, so it doesn't matter if life now stinks. In the Renaissance, they're looking at the past and learning from the past, and then looking at the problems of today and saying, how can I fix the problems of today and make life better for myself right now? They are looking for a better way of doing things. And if you look for a better way of doing things, you're probably going to find it. And if you don't, obviously you won't. You miss all the shots you don't take, right? Um, that is still seen today in different cultures around the world. How some people just say, well, life stinks and that's life. I guess we have to live with it. And other countries like America are usually very forward thinking, trying to fix any problems we see. Not all of our fixes are better than before. One thing that people are trying to fix is things like religion. But anyway, people are trying to make life better, and they do succeed in many ways. One attitude is an extreme focus on man rather than God or spiritual things or the afterlife. They're focusing on the here and now and on people. The Renaissance emphasized individuality. I am a person. Um, Rather than emphasizing the group as was common before. Instead of thinking, how can I make my nobleman richer? How can I make my nobleman stronger? How can I make my nobleman more successful or more comfortable? It's how can I make myself richer and more successful and more comfortable? How can I please myself? um, which has its pluses and minuses. Obviously, if you have a skill and you can be successful at it, go for it. But obviously, that can lead to a lot of greed, and we do see a lot of greed. We see a lot of very successful people in the Renaissance who, unfortunately, do not spend their money very wisely and focus on themselves and not sharing or caring. We see a big focus on man's ability, our ability to do whatever we want. People found that they could find solutions to problems, and so they relied on themselves to fix any problem. That is a very modern American attitude too, isn't it? There's a problem, we'll throw money at it, we'll throw American ingenuity at it, we can fix all our own problems. This is in sharp contrast to Paul, who would say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and the doctrines of relying on God. I mean, yeah, God gave you skills and abilities, use them. But we can do nothing apart from God. Jesus said, I'm the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So let's not overemphasize our ability, right? And then human dignity. The idea that I deserve to be treated better than you're treating me. In the Middle Ages, people were property to be sent off to die in pointless wars. If everyone got sick and died, oh well, that's just life. Now people are like, well, if there's a plague going around, why don't we try to find ways to cure it? And like real medicine took off in the Renaissance rather than just accepting that lots of people are going to die. In wars, a lot of countless wars were condemned and said, well, we shouldn't just be throwing human beings into the meat grinder. We should find diplomatic solutions to some of our problems rather than just aggressively attacking everyone. Even poor people deserve certain rights. And England especially took that and ran with it and gave the individuals the right to vote for government and thus and such. So human dignity. And this led to a movement called humanism. This is on page 229. Humanism has had different phases throughout the years, and today secular humanism is a complete rejection of anything spiritual, and that wasn't the case back then. Humanism was led by church leaders in the beginning. Renaissance humanism did not abandon belief in God. However, it did emphasize humanity's abilities, probably to the extreme that it is pushing God to the side a little bit, and definitely not great. Famous humanist quote by William Shakespeare: "What a piece of work is man." And piece of work back then meant what a masterpiece is man. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty. In form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. People are amazing. Our bodies, our movement, our reason and intellect, our faculty means our mental abilities, how noble we are. People are amazing, and we can do anything we set our minds to. That is a very modern American thought, isn't it? There was another humanist in Italy who said, "There is nothing to be seen more wonderful than man." People are where it's at. People are amazing, right? Man is the measure of all things. People get to judge everything based on ourselves. We are the top of the food chain, and often forgetting God in that equation. Why did the Renaissance start? It all started with education. Get a good education, guys. You have the ability. Well, why are more people getting an education? Well, it's because there's more and more towns growing, and these towns need skilled workers, and you don't get a skill overnight. You're going to need to work hard to learn that skill. As towns demand more skilled workers, they're paying those skilled workers way more than the average unskilled laborer, and so then they have plenty of money and can afford to send their kids to school. So the more skilled workers there are, the more skilled workers there will be, because they can afford to have more and more and more schools. Where was I? Anyway, the more money there is, the more money there will be. Money makes money. There's a rise in a new form of learning, not just a trade skill, which pays very well, but also people working in white-collar jobs where they're working with their brains and not with their hands. And they're using a new classroom curriculum called the humanities, also known as a liberal arts degree. This is things like science and mathematics and speech and history and politics. It's learning how to be a lawyer. It's learning how to be a judge, how to be a politician, a mayor, a governor, a historian, a mathematician. You're not working with your hands, you're working with your brain. And there was not much call for that in the Middle Ages, and now there is. And now you can get a nice career without working with your hands. It's a mental skill, not a physical skill. The goal of the Renaissance was not necessarily to get someone good at one very niche job, one specific skill. The goal was to make someone called a well-rounded individual, someone who knows a little bit of everything. Maybe you've heard the old phrase, jack of all trades, master of one. You're supposed to be good at everything know a little bit of everything, and then just really focus on one thing. That is why a lot of modern parents want their kids to learn some music skills. Even if you're not going to be a professional piano player, it's good for you to know a few chords on the piano, to be able to strum on a guitar or a violin. It's a good skill to have. Now, why do we make everyone take speech class? Not all of you are going to be politicians or teachers or someone who stands up in front of people and gives speeches, but all of you have to talk to people. So it's a good skill to have, right? There was a fascination with Greek and Roman authors, and they wrote a lot of textbooks that we still use some of them today. Some of their geometry and the Pythagorean theorem. These ancient Greeks and Romans had a lot of learning, a lot of very interesting stuff that had been mostly forgotten in the Middle Ages, and now there's a big revival of that. The Renaissance started in Italy and really took off there, and most of the most famous Renaissance people, especially in the early Renaissance, did come from Italy. And there's two reasons I see for that. Number one, the Italians still thought themselves as Roman, so they had always been proud of ancient Rome, and so they were one of those holdouts of learning throughout the Middle Ages. You will always find some Italians who do know that the ancient Greek and Roman philosophy and mathematics and poetry and all that. But really, the biggest one, I think, was that these Italian city-states like Venice dominated trade in the late Middle Ages. And so, first of all, they're getting rich, and so they have enough money to make their kids go to school. And when you have a large middle class, lots of money, lots of kids going to school, that's going to make even more money. People have time to do things other than survive. Everywhere else, people are just farming all day just for enough food to feed their kids. Well, here in Italy, people aren't just surviving, they're thriving. And so they can look for bigger and better things, like going to college. Also in their trade, they're trading with the Far East. So they're going to the Byzantine Empire, which kept a lot of learning alive, and they're going to the Arabian and Muslim countries and empires who also had really no dark ages like Europe did. So they're learning a lot of things from them and bringing them back to Italy, and that's sparking the Renaissance. During the Middle Ages, if you wanted to be an artist, good luck selling your art. There would be very, very few people who would be able to, first of all, afford to pay you, and second of all, have the interest in your art. During the Renaissance, though, we have a new group of people called patrons. A patron is someone who hires an artist of some kind to work for them, and provided that means of survival for the artists. These people are often middle class. They're not the noblemen. Sometimes they are the noblemen, but often they're new rich people, these new traders and merchants who are making a fortune, these new skilled workers in town. And they want beautiful houses, beautiful architecture, beautiful paintings inside, beautiful clothes. And so they hire people to work for them. And quite often, these artists would come live in their mansions while they're doing their work. A beautiful painting like this one might have taken a month to make or more. So the artist is working in the guy's home and drawing that. By the way, portraits, pictures of a person are first common in the Renaissance. In the Middle Ages, you don't have pictures of yourself. Any pictures that there might be are of Jesus or Mary or the apostles. And now you have portraits of yourself, which maybe in the past would be seen as really vain, but now is just a thing. And that was one of the most common ways for artists to make a living, is drawing portraits of rich people to hang in their houses. That's how Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci got started. The Medici family of Florence, Italy, controlled that entire town by being the richest family ever in Italy. They were some of the first bankers, and their extended family had their fingers in all the pies. They controlled every guild, and they spread their wealth around by hiring a bunch of people to work for them. And they were the ones who helped get this beautiful cathedral made in Florence, one of the most iconic cathedrals ever. Absolutely gorgeous. It was on the cover of the last edition of this book. Now the Taj Mahal is, but absolutely beautiful. And how did they afford this huge cathedral? Well, they're loaded because of all their trading in Florence. There's Florence in north central Italy, not too far from Bologna. Lorenzo Medici was called Il Magnifico, the Magnificent Medici. That's a pretty fun title. And he was known as, the classic patron of the arts. He hired musicians, he hired painters, he hired sculptors. In fact, there's a famous sculpture of him on page 231, and here's a painting of him. He hired architects to make beautiful buildings, not only personally, like for his houses, but as you saw, also churches and banks and other institutions were often rebuilt, hired by Lorenzo. Got some pretty cool things there. Probably this guy single-handedly made Florence the center of the early Renaissance, because everyone knows if you are a good painter or architect or whatever, if you have a skill, go to Florence. This guy has the money to pay you, and you'll make a awesome living working for him. Then later, of course, other people are trying to keep up with the Joneses. Other rich people say, well, I want my house to be at least as nice as Lorenzo's house. So they're going to try to steal these architects away to build nicer houses in other cities. But this guy started it all. Lorenzo de' Medici, il Magnifico. What's happening in literature here? First of all, there are a bunch of Italian writers, and writing and literature really did start the Renaissance. It started with literature, then it moved to painting and music and architecture and all that. It all started with the books. Petrarch was one of the first Renaissance authors, and there's this beautiful picture of him in a hoodie and a double chin. They call him the father of humanism. He's that influential. He wrote a bunch of letters to dead people, like Cicero and Virgil and Livy. He pretended like he was pen pals with these ancient Roman writers and tried to copy their style. And this is what I would say to them if they were still alive. So that's interesting. Baldassaro Castiglione, in the early 1500s, wrote a famous book on etiquette. That is, how to be polite in Renaissance society. Let me read to you some of this. Neither in jest nor in earnest should anyone say anything against God or his saints, no matter how witty and pleasant it may be. This sin was often committed. Saying don't be rude to God or a saint, because that's rude. It says, remember that to speak lightly of God is not only the sign of a wicked and sinful man, but also the vice of a man with no manners. So it's not just sinful, it's also rude, which is worse, right? You should not, therefore, oppose common custom in these practices, but rather moderately adapt yourself to them, so that you will not be the only one in your neighborhood to wear a long gown down to your feet, while everyone else wears a short one just past the belt, and so that everyone turns around to look at it. So it is also with those who do not dress according to the prevailing style, but according to their own taste. It says it's really rude if you're the only one in the neighborhood who's stuck in the past. Everyone else is wearing the modern style, and you're wearing the old style. You're drawing attention to yourself. That is actually called modesty. Modesty is not drawing attention to yourself. So sometimes wearing 50-year-old clothes, well, sometimes that's really in style. Everything comes back, right? But often it's just drawing attention to yourself and is kind of rude. It says, if you have placed a pear to cook by the fireplace or roasted bread on the coals, you must not blow on it if it is covered with a few ashes. For the saying is, there never was wind without rain. You must rather tap the dish gently or by some other means brush off the ashes. So how to cook politely. If you blow the ashes off, you might cause a cloud of dust to come up and cover other people's food. So that's rude. You heard of Niccolo Machiavelli? I had to do a paper on his most famous book, The Prince. He wrote a book advising a prince how to gain and keep power. And maybe he's most familiar by saying something along the lines of the ends justify the means, saying it doesn't matter what you do as long as you keep your power. So he would write things like, the noblemen often cause trouble. So if a nobleman causes trouble, chop his head off and all his children and kick his dog too, and then no one else will get mad at you. It's like, oh, okay. attempting some rather cruel stuff to gain power. He says, there's different rules for the nobleman or the king as for the peasant. The peasant has to be kind and obey the law and everything. The king can do whatever he wants as long as he doesn't get the people too angry and then sees the peasant revolt on his hands. So very, very interesting. He said, he asked the question in The Prince, is it better to be feared or to be loved? And it's better to be both feared and loved. But if you have to pick one, it's better to be feared. If people love you, their love can grow cold, and then they kick you out of office and chop your head off. But if they fear you, they wouldn't dare come against you. So every once in a while, remind them why you're a scary prince. Just randomly kill a few peasants, and that'll do the trick. So not the nicest guy ever. What about some non-Italian authors? Erasmus here. Erasmus was a very interesting person. He wrote a book that was full-on satire, irony, called In Praise of Folly, which is literally him praising stupid people and foolishness. So it'd be like today if someone wrote an ironic book saying how wonderful the Kardashians are and how everyone should be just like them. Like he's pointing out some of the stupid things that people do in the name of fashion or something, and use that book to kind of change people's minds. He also, this is probably the most famous thing he did, he compiled the first Greek New Testament. So back before this, the New Testament was only in bits and pieces. They had the book of Luke or the book of Ephesians, and if you wanted a New Testament, you could go buy a Latin New Testament, but you could not buy the original New Testament. So this guy got all these ancient manuscripts, some of them thousands of years old, some of them from the first century AD, and he compiled all these different manuscripts together to publish a Greek New Testament so anyone could go out and buy one. Now, not everyone knew how to read Greek, but a lot of people did. A lot of Renaissance people did know how to read Greek. But what's even more important for that is that when people start writing in the common language, in the vernacular, they start wanting to translate the Bible into their own language so the common person can read. And how are they doing that? They're using Erasmus's Greek New Testament to translate directly from Greek to English or whatever, instead of going from Greek to Latin to English. On the bottom of page 232, we have his philosophy of the Bible in your own language. It says, I strongly dissent from those who are unwilling to have the scriptures translated into the vernacular and read by the ignorant, as if Christ taught so complicated a doctrine that it could be hardly understood even by a handful of theologians. That was the common Catholic teaching of the day, that the Bible is way too complicated for the commoner to understand, and only us smarty pants can read the Bible, and we'll tell you what the Bible says. Erasmus said, what are you talking about? Jesus did not teach so complicated things that only smarty pants can hear. Anyone can understand what Jesus taught about. He said, it is perhaps reasonable to conceal the mysteries of kings. Okay, so maybe some politicians, politics might be too complicated to understand, but Christ seeks to divulge his mysteries as much as possible. He says Jesus did not want to keep secrets. He wanted to preach. He wanted to, when he says divulge, he wanted to reveal the secrets of Christianity as much as possible. I should like to have even the most humble women read the Gospels and the epistles of St. Paul. Wow, Renaissance guy says even women should be able to read the Bible. Would that the plowboy recited something from them at his plowshare, that the weaver sang from them at his shuttle, and that the traveler whiled away the tedium of his journey with their tales. Isn't that interesting? He wished that the commoner, the poor person, the peasant would be able to read and remember Bible stories rather than just whatever they're doing, gossiping all day long, reading Bible stories. Now, Erasmus was a strong Catholic, but he definitely did have some really good ideas here that's going to lead to the Reformation. I would not call him a reformer by any means, but he definitely did lay the foundation of saying, hey, everyone should read the Bible and everyone should get their doctrine from the Bible. Sir Thomas More was a famous British politician. He wrote a book called Utopia, which is Greek for nowhere, in which he describes the ideal world. And he thought that England was too lazy, and in the ideal world, everyone would be working hard, even the rich people would be working hard. He also thought England was too greedy. So in Utopia, no one cares about money. In fact, the only people who care about jewelry and stuff are the stupid people. So he wrote a story about how a group of utopians traveled to a distant country, and the people in front of this little parade are wearing all these golden jewels and fancy clothes, and everyone thinks that they're like the king and the princess and everyone. And the people in back are just wearing normal everyday clothes. And that led to some confusion because only the stupid peasants were wearing the jewelry because they thought gold was fun, and the knowledgeable, wise leaders are just wearing everyday clothes. In that passage, they explained that little children play with gold and jewels as toys, but then they grow out of it, and except for some foolish people who never grow out of loving gold. That's funny, seeing as Sir Thomas More always goes around with this giant gold chain. He wrote a lot of other stuff, and eventually he was beheaded by Henry VIII, who liked beheading people, because he would not go along with Henry VIII's new church, the Church of England, which we'll talk about in a couple days. Maybe you've heard of Miguel de Cervantes, the only worldwide popular Spanish author. There are no classical Spanish authors that are translated more widely than Miguel de Cervantes. He wrote the stories of Don Quixote, which is a story of an old man who is living in Renaissance times but wishes that he was a knight in shining armor back in the days of romance and dragons and rescuing fair princesses. And it's actually really, really funny because this guy is like super stupid, but there's a lot of drama, and I love the book. And probably the most classic example of a Renaissance author would be William Shakespeare. Not only wrote a whole bunch of sonnets and poetry, and I have his collection of sonnets if you ever want to browse through it, but also, of course, he's most famous for his. And if you are not a fan of Shakespeare, I would recommend getting an edition that has explanations and translations in it. I have several editions of various plays that, book notes or footnotes, sorry, the different words that we don't know, and explains a lot of the references, because they did have a lot of pop references, pop culture references that we might not understand today, but they can explain that are rather hilarious. The funniest example of stage direction is Exit Pursued by Bear. You go, wait, what? It's just in the middle of a speech is over, and then a bear comes on stage and chases them away. You go, what in the world is going on? Besides just being silly, there was actually an expedition to the Arctic that came back with 2 polar bear cubs, and they were in the zoo. And it just so happens that the guy who ran the Royal Zoo is Shakespeare's good buddy. And so it seems like these polar bears were part of the pop culture of the day. They're referenced in several poems and stories of the day, and everyone went to the zoo to see these white bears. So it's very likely that he had his buddy bring a couple polar bear cubs to his play and have them chase the actors off the stage just as a joke. Oh, sorry. I'm just fiddling with the bell over here. He wrote 154 sonnets, at least 37 plays. His plays are divided into history, comedy, and tragedy. And comedy does not mean it's silly all the way. It just means that it has a happy ending. And tragedy does not mean that it's sad the whole time. It just means it has a sad ending. So the history, the comedy, and the tragedy all has hilarious lines in it that I highly recommend you read. The tragedies are probably the most popular, including Hamlet, a story about a guy whose uncle kills his father and then kicks him out, but he eventually gets revenge and becomes king. So the Lion King is Hamlet in the animal world. Othello, which is a great story of betrayal and lost love and racial stereotypes and prejudices, and it's really, really good. King Lear, about an old elderly king with 3 daughters, not sure how to run the kingdom after he dies. Macbeth, about a Scotsman who cheats and stabs his way to become king. Oh, I love Macbeth. Comedies, Twelfth Night, Midsummer's Night's Dream, absolutely love him, hilarious. A lot of his comedies include cross-dressing, which it would be very hilarious to the people at the time, especially since no women were allowed to be actors. So already all the girl actors are guys dressed up as girls, probably not very convincingly at all, which of course makes it that much more funny. And then you have guy actors pretending to be girls, pretending to be guys. A lot of his comedy has to do with missed identity and mistaken identities, and it's great. Some of the histories include Richard III. I mentioned that earlier in the Hundred Years' War. Several about Henry. Henry IV is a really good one. Julius Caesar is a really good one. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Here's a few lines. He has eaten me out of house and home. Henry IV. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. Also Henry IV. Twelfth Night. Be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some with greatness thrust upon them. From Julius Caesar, cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste death but once. From Hamlet, never a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and a friend. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. To be or not to be, that is the question, probably the most famous Shakespeare line. I must be cruel only to be kind. And in measure for measure, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. Now, Shakespeare set most of his plays in Italy because that's the height of the Renaissance. All's Well That Ends Well is set in Florence, Romeo and Juliet in Verona, Love's Labour's Lost in Mantua, and The Merchant of Venice in Venice.